All right. It looks like we're live.
Hey.
And for the first time, for sure ever for me, maybe in the history of YouTube, the window that has the chat on it is muted so that in about 60 seconds, the echo chamber doesn't start. I'm so proud of myself. Take this off of here. Okay. Hi, everybody. I have with me, joining us, DM Scotty and Kemper. Your handle is it mega move mega?
Yeah.
Kemper is also a chicken. If you didn't know that by his screen grab. So I just kind of got a wild hair, decided, this would be fun to have a chat. I don't even know if anyone's going to watch this. If it's just the three of us, we're going to entertain ourselves and y'all can just deal with it, okay?
Oh, yeah.
It's a school night.
Couldn't ask for a better group.
I can't say up. It's a school night.
I agree. All right, I'm going to switch cameras. This is going to be my live feed, which is, just so you know, I am absolutely not an expert at this. I am a practicing learner on all things miniature, but what do I have here? I've got a little bit of show and tell that might be kind of fun, a few different tricks, some gear I've built that's overkill for the quality of painting I do right now. But yeah, I figured we could just hang out and welcome everybody to Glue Sticks and Chill, the creepiest live broadcast in all of tabletop crafting.
Yes. Yeah, so I'm working on a Halloween game, Death Trap Dungeon.
Death Trap. What's it?
Death Trap Dungeon.
Ah, Death Trap Dungeon. Okay.
Yeah. You essentially wake up in the sewer and you're locked in there and you have to find the key to get out. And
that happened to me once in high school.
And suddenly you realize that the water is starting to rise. You only have a certain amount of time to find the key to get out. And there's a psycho killer in there with you. And the scenario is called Aqualung, so you can guess how the psycho killer is equipped.
So are you running this on Halloween?
Actually, no, I'm going to run it next Saturday.
Oh, okay.
But I will. I'm going to try to broadcast it, not live, but I'm going to do a video on it.
Nice.
Yeah.
For some reason, I think of a psycho killer named Aqualung would have like a flute.
Yeah. People like get that. We're gonna get that song in their head.
I know. Yes.
So I knew this guy at the karaoke bar. He would pick songs that had the longest instrumental breaks possible, so he could be on stage as long as he could. So that was one of them, because there's like a solo or something that's like 5 minutes. He would do like Lynyrd Skynyrd, Tuesday's Gone, that has like a 3-minute guitar solo, and he'd just stand up there and drink his beer in between. But he liked being on stage, so
that's hilarious.
So this contraption is something I picked up from Viv at, is it Knights of Kevlar now? Rubbish In, Rubbish Out was his channel. But this is a extra large pill bottle, a bunch of zip ties and hot glue, a jigsaw blade that was getting pretty worn out. And you go like this, take the lid off. I'm going to be using some red. Throw in an agitator, which is, I was agitated by this because it's a marble my kids left on the floor that I step on and trip over and hurt myself on. Throw this in here. And I put a little foam, not foam board. What am I talking about? What's the word I'm looking for?
Oh, is it that foam? The foam sheets?
Yeah, foam sheets. Just to give it a tight seal on here. And then I put it in the old Black & Decker jigsaw. I'll mute it when it's time to do this, although I can't mute inside the house. I did warn my wife. I said I'm going to use the paint shaker. But I think she was just trying to ignore that the man she married is doing things like this at 11 at night downstairs. So she didn't say anything. She's watching TV. Okay, ready? Here, I'll mute it. I'll do it one time with the thing unmuted, just so you can hear it. It's lots of fun. Your ears are going to bleed in a second.
That's genius.
Okay. Yeah, it gets it a pretty good shake.
Cool.
I suppose I don't need to do that. I'm going to unplug it before I hurt myself. There we go.
But shaking paint is why my arms are so big.
You're like Popeye? There we go. Kemper, what are you working on tonight?
I am taking just 2 pieces of foam. Let's see, I guess they're about a 1.5 inch thick. I'm putting them together and just cutting holes in it to make a paint holder.
Nice.
With my, I'm using a hot wire foam factory cutter on it. Slowly getting moved into the new house, and so I'm trying to get everything kind of organized somewhat. And I usually have paint bottles everywhere. I don't know if you guys have that problem.
Oh, yeah.
The trouble when I organize stuff is then I have no idea where I put it.
Yeah.
I talk about there's Nathan and then there's not so smart Nathan. Actually, and then sometimes smart Nathan. But when I find something of like, oh, I put this in a place I totally would have remembered. That was really smart. I totally forgot I did this. Then that's when smart Nathan gets behind the wheel. When it's like, oh, I think I'm going to put my glasses inside of the fridge because I'm not thinking right now. That's when not so smart Nathan gets behind the wheel. And he causes problems for me. Archmage in the chat asking what minis. These minis minus this tiger that is for my daughter. These 2 oafs. I'll try and get a close up.
Oh,
you can't really see. Well,
that's
kind
a
of.
nice oaf.
These are all 3D printed. And they're supposed to be like ruffians for the Fandelvin mini campaign I'm running. And I'm like, these guys are just too giant, but I printed 2 of them. And then I thought, I should work them into kind of a Tweedledee and Tweedledum like NPCs that show up every now and then, because it's just kind of funny. They're just giant. So I've got about 10 of these Red Brand ruffians that I'm going to be painting tonight. But all of these were on my 3D printer. I got some Fat Dragon Games skeletons. If you've never seen their minis that they've been making, trying to get the light in a good angle, it doesn't use any rafters. It just prints it from the bottom up, and it looks fantastic. The only trick that I learned though is not so smart Nathan thought, oh, I'm going to save some time and print 2 at once, save myself 45 minutes. Well, the nozzle has to go from one build to the other, so it was really stringy, if that makes sense, from going from one to the other. So it's best to just print them one at a time. That's just a little pitfall that I learned making this stuff. So,
Nathan, how long does it take you to print one of those?
I'd say usually between 45 minutes to an hour, but some of that's intentional because I slowed down the speed of the printer also, because you can get like almost like a I know it's a physical thing, but I think they call it almost like an echo or something, where it like reverberates sometimes, and you get these weird like. Yeah, do you know what I'm trying to talk about, Scotty? On the prints, it's like it's like it reverberates, and you see the same pattern where you're not supposed to if it's moving too fast. I don't know if you've ever had that on some of your prints.
Yeah, I think I've definitely seen every kind of failure.
Another tool that's been helpful. This is a little file set I got from, I think, just Amazon. But having just a nice little file set to get some of the wisps, as Gareth would call them, is kind of helpful. So I'm just cleaning them up a little bit, but like we were talking about earlier, Scotty, there's 10 of these, so I'm not going to worry about any of them looking perfect.
Right.
But it's the 3D printing's been pretty fun. I bought a called the Anet A8 for like maybe $130 a while back. Assembled it, assuming full well that not all the parts would be there, and you know, it's shipped to you in parts from China, and sure enough, I wasn't disappointed. There were pieces missing and wires I had to kind of cobble. But once it was all up and running, I mean, you can't beat the price, because this is probably like 9 cents of PLA you're looking at.
Oh yeah, totally.
And these ones, they've been primed. One of my favorite spots is in my county. If you're a resident, you can drop off waste materials. You just show your license. And then there's this rack of like reuse it stuff. If you want to, you know, grab anything, paint, weed killer, spray paint, leather varnish, all sorts of random stuff. But I found stone texture, tons of flat black, gloss. So I've got this whole like horde of sometimes full and sometimes half full just cans of paint. And that's what I just use as whatever first can of flat black I found. And it primed them really well.
That is awesome.
You need like a gallon jar of burnt umber acrylic.
I did find a bag of tile grout that was like a kind of a dirt color. And if you ever watch Luke Affordable Painting Service, I noticed, well, and who's the other guy? Luke Towan, I think.
Yeah.
Australian guy. He's just phenomenal.
Yeah.
And he uses grout, I think, too, which makes sense because it would harden pretty thick for whatever you're putting on there. So, but enough of me yakking. Scotty, since I got you on here, in a lot of ways, you got me over the first hurdle of painting miniatures, which was mental because I'm like, I don't even know where to start. Like, it can be kind of intimidating. But you talked to me about a concept called table ready, and I'd love it if you, you know, just tell anybody watching this now or later, kind of what that whole concept is.
Yeah. You know, the table ready is about, you know, painting a bunch of miniatures to a decent standard, but not worrying about like a super amount of detail. Now, if you're painting, you know, your player character, you may want to spend that extra time on it. But if you're painting a bunch of minions or just fighters, you may not want to spend so much time. So basically what I do is I just, you know, do the base colors on the thing, put a wash and maybe a dry brush on it. And that's kind of it. You know, I don't really do too much more detail than that. And to tell you the truth, when it's sitting on the table, you really can't see much more detail than that. It's really only when you do close-ups or hold it maybe a couple inches from your face that you would notice any difference from other miniatures. It's you know, when it's on the table, if it looks good on the table, it's table ready. So that's kind of my philosophy. I'd rather have a bunch of, you know, things painted than maybe have, oh, I only had time to paint 2 things that look great, you know, but everything else isn't painted. So Yeah. So that's kind of my philosophy on it. And, you know, when you paint the base colors and you add a wash to something, it's amazing how much detail that brings out.
Scotty, what kind of wash do you generally use with those? Scotty?
Uh-huh.
What kind of wash do you generally use with those?
I've been using more washes that I buy, like Vallejo or Army Painter and that kind of thing. But you can just basically use your own wash. Just you know, like a kind of a medium or dark brown works nicely for most things. Just add, you know, use some acrylic paint. Add a little bit of soap that just kind of helps it flow into the crevices better. It breaks the tension of the water, and just paint it on or dip it in, and yeah, you'll have a decent mini.
What I prep to do, and you know, if I do a little bit more in depth on it, I'll have to share the video. But a guy was showing how he uses just the tiny little tubes of oil paint, and then mineral spirits, and he uses that for his wash. And you can get for maybe like $10 at a craft store a pack of these oil paints, and then really any tone that you want to make for your wash, and it looks really great in the video. So once these bad boys, I've been kind of doing them all in different phases of, you know, as much as I can work in getting the same thing done of prime them, paint them. Next up is wash them. And then did you mention too, you maybe do like a white, just a dust or dry brush too?
Yeah, I will do that sometimes. Not all the time, but
yeah,
if it's something that I might be darker, or like, you know, an orc or something, I don't worry too much about it. But if it's another kind of thing, you might want to do like a light dusting of you know, either the color that it was, or, you know, like a white.
Yeah.
My friend does that a lot with the white. I think he calls it frosting.
Frosting.
Yeah. We're experiencing that in Minnesota right now. We had October 14th, and the kids were making snowmen in the yard.
I think I'm going to do paper minis for my Death Trap Dungeon Crawl, my Halloween one-shot, because it's hard to find just modern-day civilians miniatures.
Yeah.
That don't have guns. You know? They usually have weapons or guns. But yeah, it's hard to just find regular people.
So you can freely shill whatever you want on this chat if you want to tell us a little bit more about your, what did you call it? Death Trap of fun?
Well, maybe not so fun for them, but yeah. So I met somebody named Brian Crenshaw. He created a game called Survive the Night, and I really liked the game. It's a very simple system. You know, it gets out of the way of it gets out of the way of the fun. You know, the scariness of the adventures. He's written some really great adventures for it. And I saw him run this one, the Aqualung one that I'm going to run. And the Aqualung is essentially, you're just normal Joes. You wake up in a sewer, and about 20 feet above you is a sewer grate that's been chained shut with a giant padlock. And you can see a camera looking down on you from the top there. You soon realize that you're being watched the whole time. And if you do anything to mess with the cameras, there'll be some price to pay, which you'll find out at some point. So I asked the creator, I said, huh, so in any of your games, did anybody mess with the cameras? Just out of curiosity. And he said, there were certain players that wanted to, but then the rest of the group stopped them. Because the voice says, if you mess with the cameras, there will be a price to pay. And they're already worried about the situation they're in, so they don't want to add, more. So basically, you soon realize that the water is rising, slowly rising, okay? And you're all going to drown in here unless you find the key to get out. Well, they also find out that there's a maniac killer in here with them who is equipped for the aquatic environment called Aqualung, okay? So he's equipped for it and you're not. You're in your normal street clothes. So yeah, you've got to find the key and get out. There are several different ways to beat it, but there's also some like really deadly traps that aren't obviously deadly traps. You know what I'm saying? Where they kind of skew your expectation of how the trap should work, and it works a different way. I really like that. That's pretty cool. So there's several of those in there, which is nice. And then there's some stuff to mess with you and that kind of thing. Some interesting little things you have to figure out, puzzles and that kind of thing. But yeah, it's really, really cool. And I'm building the dungeon. I've got going totally 2.5D old school with the dungeon. Although I'm inspired by Wylock. You're gonna be like, oh damn, I got him talking now. I can't shut him up. So I was inspired by Wylock. So my tiles are very kind of Wylockian in nature, where
Wylockian. You heard it here first. Trademark.
Yeah. Except mine aren't nearly as modular because I'm just making the one dungeon. So they are modular, but I'm making like whole hull sections as opposed to what he would do, where you put a bunch of tiles together to make a hall. I'm just making the whole hull section essentially.
Yeah.
And maybe break the hull up in 3 or 4 pieces as opposed to, like 20 tiles to make the hull. But anyways, it's very similar to his technique. He was also talking about something that is pretty freaking fantastic in one of his recent videos. He did a video where he did some scatter terrain he's really getting into Warhammer. He's been doing a lot of Warhammer stuff. So he did some scatter terrain with junk, right? And painted up to look like, rubble and that kind of thing. And, just battlefield.
Objective markers and stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So what he did was he put it on or foam core. He likes to use the dollar store foam core like I do. But one of the problems with foam core is it tends to bend, right? Like that's kind of a problem sometimes in the 2.5D, and it's a problem with the foam core because the foam core, when you paint it on, it sucks up the paint and then bends that way. It tends to bend towards where you put the paint on. Well, what he did was with that terrain that he made, he painted white glue on the bottom of the foam core, and that straightened it back out.
Yeah, I was really surprised in the video to see that. Have you?
I was too high. I was surprised how well it worked. Like basically, he let it set for 24 hours, painted the bottom, let it set for 24 hours, and I've been doing pretty big tiles. I did like kind of a 9 by 11 room, and it totally worked. It straightened that room out. So I was super impressed with that. And all the other tiles that I've done, it straightened them all out. I had some with some pretty nasty bends, and it's essentially nearly straightened them all out. So pretty impressive. So that's a great thing. I also did with this dungeon, I did something cool that I was pretty proud of. When I painted it, I got the black foam core and left the paper on, so I didn't have to paint it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so I just had to paint the edges. So what I did was, for the edges, I just painted them with black acrylic paint mixed with white glue, and then covered the edges up of the tiles, and then sponged on, because it's like a concrete sewer, So then I sponged on the concrete colors and kind of the muck, and mixed it with white glue. So essentially the paint and the white glue soak into the black paper and kind of make it a little bit harder, like give it some strength. So they came out really nice. I'm really happy with them.
One of the ways I found early on I could unbend cardboard is so you paint, like let's say it was just corrugated like this, you paint one side and it starts to bend. I found if I tipped it over and misted it with like a bottle sprayer and then let that dry, then that would also bend back.
Oh, that's awesome.
So I wonder if even you could skip the glue and just try soaking the other side with it. But I don't know. It'd be an easy experiment to do, but I did find with cardboard that worked really well for me, that it would bend it back. It's kind of like a, back and forth. So
that's awesome. That's awesome. I do like using the glue because the glue soaks into the paper on the bottom, and you know how the paper can come off the foam core. That'll keep it from coming off.
Oh, so he didn't peel it on the paper on the bottom.
No, I left the paper on the bottom.
Oh, okay. I thought it was actually into the foam, which was why it seemed crazy of like, how the heck does that work? So I wonder if it would work if you left the paper on and just sprayed it with some water and skipped the glue. But
it might work, but like I say, I wanted the paper to stay on, and it soaked into the paper. So now it's going to be nicely secure to the foam core, and it gives a little bit of strength actually too. Nice. As opposed to the water, which won't do anything for it except maybe bend it back. So yeah, but the water is cheaper, definitely cheaper.
No, I only use Fiji, like the really nice stuff. There was this Penn and Teller show once where they would at this fancy restaurant had a hidden camera and this water connoisseur going to different tables telling them about the different waters that they could buy, and they all came from the same garden hose. But they had like the way they sold it of like, okay, this is the Fuji, this comes from a mountain spring in Japan, and people are like, yep, it's crisper, it's definitely crisper, and like it's all the exact same water. It's just really funny. I love that there's this Facebook page called something like dihydrogen monoxide awareness. And it's like, so it'll be like a picture of like hazmat guys of like, why do hazmat people use dihydrogen monoxide to clean things, and they'll sell it to you in the store to drink. It's just like making it sound like this terrible thing.
Scotty, I was going to let you know I tried to build some tiles out of that cold porcelain, and that was kind of an interesting experiment because the tiles every day got a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller and a little bit smaller.
Right.
Oh, it was funny because, I mean, you could have probably started out with 28 millimeter figures and then you'd be down to 15 millimeter figures when you were done.
Yeah, exactly.
It was so funny how much it shrank.
Yeah, it'll shrink about 15-20%.
Yeah.
Cold Porcelain sounds like a good band name.
It does.
I saw them play at South by Southwest.
Yeah.
Kemper, it's been Kemper, it's been a little while, but tell us about I love the stuff you had on Catchin the Weasel Asleep.
Yeah.
I'm still not positive what it means, but I'm still trying to catch the weasel asleep.
I think it's a Western expression that it's, something that it would be like rolling a 00. You can never catch a weasel asleep. So that's kind of the thing. I was kind of getting into old Western stuff. I still am. In fact, I just was out in the Western United States. I filmed quite a bit of stuff out there. Just various. I went out to like Deadwood, and I went out to Dodge City and Custer Battlefield, and some of the other historical places out there and filmed some. But the hardest part about making videos is putting them together. I'm just surprised how much effort that takes.
Yeah.
But eventually, I'd like to maybe get a little more modern game of Old West, an Old West type game, kind of a Boot Hill type of game. I mean, there's several out there right now that are pretty good, but some are like really pretty complicated, and others are maybe just a little too simple. And be kind of neat to have a medium crunch kind of game out there for Old West stuff.
You did a really nice video on a Western storefront.
Oh, thanks.
That I thought was just great.
Oh, wow. That's good to hear. That's encouraging. I need to get out and start doing it more, because that's good. It's like, somebody watch this. This is great. I don't know, when you had your first video out, did you feel like, I wonder if anybody will ever watch this?
Oh, man. Well, judging by the metrics right now, I'm still wondering that. As I watch the live feed.
I was inspired by your cleaning your game room video.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
You know what's amazing? Like a couple days after that, the whole thing flooded.
Oh.
And well, I should preface that. Like stuff on the floor was about to get totally soaked because we had some sump issues that are figured out now, but that set me back for a little while. And the wife, she's like, oh, well, like, we need functioning laundry room instead of your game room. She just doesn't get it.
Well, now my game room is my laundry room. Don't mind the dryer in the corner.
Yeah.
Yes, Scotty, when you did your first video, did you wonder, is anybody going to watch this? Oh, I lost.
It's too emotional. He can't talk about it.
I guess so. It's just remember those days.
Catching the Scotty asleep.
Catching the Scotty. It doesn't happen very often, but when it does. So, yeah, I need to get some other videos out there, and I was going to try to make it just a little more complex each time. And like I say, it's been almost a year now, and I am really surprised at how much video editing, how much effort that takes.
Yeah.
That's amazing how much. And Scotty pointed that out too, that, every time, for every, minute you put in of the video, you put an hour behind the scenes just editing.
Yeah. There are some tricks, like for me, I think one time somebody asked about it. They're like, oh, I love the photos you use in your videos. And I'm like, that is absolutely just to save time. So I'll Ken Burns a photo instead of shooting a bunch of video.
Uh-huh.
And no one's ever really complained about it or said anything. But I can just fly through and grab some quick snapshots and go from whatever angle. I don't have to worry about a tripod. And that's been a nice, quick sort of time hack.
That's a suggestion.
And if you ever want to utilize that too, it for me, it did save a lot of time. And also just for my setup, I've got a webcam, which is fine for some stuff, but again, you have to move it around. And I like with the DSLR or even with a phone image, some of the shots you can get, it's like it just looks so crisp, or you can get it like depth of field and all that stuff that you just can't quite get with a webcam.
I think the other thing too with Historical West is that I kind of run into is I always wonder, how much I can use, freely with the copyright issues and, photos. And I'd love to do stuff on like Old West music and everything, but I'm never quite sure how much of that material I can use that's in the public domain versus.
Yeah. Well, the one thought would be if you wanted to use like actual photos from the time, a lot of them probably are in the public domain.
Yeah.
So they'd be black and white.
Yeah. Which is awesome for that purpose.
But there are some, if you I can't think of the name off the top of my head, but if you Google either Creative Commons photo searches or even archive.org is a website that you can search by license type.
Okay.
Another cool one, this is more that I've used for like medieval type stuff is the British Library's Flickr account.
Oh,
And they
okay.
might even have some Old West stuff, even though, you know, they're the red coats. But there's been just really cool artwork and stuff that it's all free to use. I've tried to credit still, and you know that it's British Library, but that's been a really cool website too. That you can just find all sorts of, like, I don't know, for the most part they just don't paint stuff or sketch stuff like they used to, you know.
Yeah. But yeah, I got to visit some really cool Old West places. I really enjoyed Deadwood. That was pretty neat to see. And one thing I'd like to build is a Pharaoh table. I think that would be cool to build a Pharaoh table, and kind of like they had in Tombstone. I remember Wyatt Earp ran the Pharaoh game out of Tombstone, and I think it'd be fun to make a small one that players could, you know, use at the table. That might be a good project for me to get going on. So Nathan, what's the next con you're going to?
Probably Gary Con again. There's one called Con of the North near me, but I've never been able to make it. I think it's in February. Gary Con, I typically run a couple chainmail games.
Oh wow!
And, it's the same scenario that I usually run, which is it never goes the same way, but it is nice to be like, okay, like you don't have to do a ton of prep when it's like it comes back pretty quick, you know, like, okay, here's what happens, here's the forces and all that stuff. I'm trying to think though. I got to go to Gen Con 50 in Indianapolis 2 Augusts ago, and that was really cool. But I don't see myself going back anytime soon. 60,000 people is pretty busy. A lot of folks. And honestly, I didn't see any place other than the Lucas Oil Stadium where we were running. This was a historic display where they did the footprint of the Lake Geneva Horticultural Hall where the first Gen Con was.
Oh wow!
So I on a sand table, I got to run some of these chainmail scenarios and a few other games that they would have played in the late 60s, early 70s, it was really cool. But man, it was a lot of people, which isn't bad in itself. But with Gary Con, I've been there enough times. It's kind of like seeing your old friends again because you get to know people over the years or meet new people, and it definitely has a smaller feel, and it is a little smaller. So,
and you hang with a lot of the old timers. That's pretty cool. The old grognards that played the game.
Yeah, you know, it's kind of through kind of totally separate groups ended up getting to know a number of these guys that were in the Blackmore campaign, which there's a lot of debate, and I'm not like gonna die on any hills over it, but really the first fantasy campaign wasn't from Gary Gygax. It was from Dave Arneson, who grew up in St. Paul,
right? Yeah,
with his gamers, and technically this was the first fantasy role playing. And before that, you had this game called Brownstone, which is actually a role playing Western with vampires, because they were super into Dark Shadows at the time. And then a little bit before that, you had this scenario called Brownstein that my friend Dave Wesley came up with. So as I've gotten to know these guys, it's just been really cool to kind of hear their stories, and they still meet once a year, and sometimes I have a chance to delve through Blackmore with them, and it's just crazy to think for 50 years nearly these guys have been friends and active and staying. Some of them have passed away, before I got to the table and some of them after, which is always tough. But it's definitely like a real camaraderie. And I think for a lot of them too, the social aspect is a big piece of their lives.
That is so cool.
Yeah, so that's been really fun to kind of get to know some of these old school guys.
Yeah, I contacted Dave Wesley once just to he went to KU and
yeah, that's right.
I said, so were you playing this game? Because I figured they were in the same building that I was going to pharmacy school in.
Yeah.
The physics department was just down a couple floors, and
yeah,
I just thought that was pretty wild.
It's like I think his degree was, or maybe his master's in like high energy particle physics.
Yeah,
he is the smartest person I've ever met. It's just amazing. And he came from just a really humble house. Dad was like a auto mechanic, but he got a presidential scholar award, and that opened a lot of doors. And someone has once called him a tower of intellect, and I would not disagree with that. It's just crazy.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so he's always got a story, an in-depth story about any subject. And I learned from him you can microwave ice cubes and they won't melt, at least very quickly. So it's like, okay, he just knows all sorts of different stuff. So if you do make it up here, I think I mentioned this, but at the Northfield Bank, First Bank or whatever it is,
yeah,
I want to try and have a Boot Hill scenario of the defeat of Jesse James there. And I think that would be pretty awesome if they have a conference room or something, or even if it's nearby at a coffee shop or something.
On the same note, I think if you ought to come down here, we ought to go to Coffeeville and do the same thing at the bank there.
So when you said you were in Dodge City, is that where the get the hell out of Dodge Dodge City?
Yeah, we eventually did. It's actually a pretty decent Old West museum there.
Okay.
You'd think it'd be kind of a tourist trap, but the museum there, Front Street Museum, is actually pretty nice, and they've got a pretty good collection of arms there, and just Old West stuff. Of course, I mean, you're from the Midwest, so you know how it goes. I mean, we got history stuff everywhere out here, which is nice.
This summer, we took the girls to Pepin, Wisconsin, to the Laura Ingalls Wilder exhibit there. Right. And it's not like, Gunsmoke Old West.
Yeah.
But I mean, those books, I read them when I was a kid. My girls love them. Just to kind of see some of those historic things was really cool. So yeah, whenever you can it's history that with America, I mean, you have some Native American stuff and even some Viking stuff here up in the far north that goes back pretty far. But in terms of, I got to visit the UK once, and for a choir trip in high school, and we stayed in this stone cottage that was like 600 years old, and it was just like no big deal for them. It's like, what? But old West and some of that stuff, Civil War, I mean, that is kind of our deep history in terms of if you're going to move outside of Native American and Viking stuff, which is amazing in its own right.
Right.
I don't know if I was into Old West as much as when I was a kid, I'd get books from the library about just Native Americans and how they lived and their resourcefulness of where they would live and how they would build wigwams and canoes and all this stuff. It's just pretty amazing.
Yeah, that is pretty awesome stuff too. And I kind of the area that kind of interests me a lot is the fur trading era, and that would be a really fertile area for an RPG, I think.
Yeah,
is the fur trading era, and even making kind of a fantasy type game would be really neat, I think.
What's Last of the Mohicans, James Fenimore Cooper.
Yeah.
You could probably draw some inspiration from that. At GaryCon, I met a guy by the name of John Pickens, and I wouldn't expect and I didn't at first know the name from TSR D&D days until I heard what he did. And then most books that I had, I opened it up, and sure enough, he was on the editing team or the design team of hundreds of
Oh, wow.
games and modules. And another one of these guys, he's got all sorts of interesting stories, and I'm writing down books and movies to watch and all these sorts of things. But one of the things he said is, if you want to look at the quintessential paladin, read the Deer Slayer.
Oh, yeah.
And Natty.
Yeah, Natty Bumpo.
Is his, it's almost ridiculous, but he's this high virtue, you know, clear right and wrong in his eyes of all these different things, and never takes advantage of people or situations. And
I never thought of that.
Yeah. So, and you wouldn't think to go there for fantasy stuff, but it was pretty interesting. He's you know, super devoted to his religion and his principles, and can't be swayed. And so yeah, it was a it was a D&D lens that I read the Deer Slayer with, which was kind of funny. Probably one of the first times that's ever happened for James Fenimore Cooper's work.
Well, I think, you know, it really fired my imagination. About the same time I discovered Dungeons and Dragons, this would be about 78 or so, which just seems like yesterday. And we watched a lot of in 8th grade history, we watched all these fur trading type movies like Centennial and Man in the Wilderness and some of those. And that kind of fired my imagination at the same time. And so I don't know. I think it would make, and along with a lot of the Indian mythology and and some of the mythology from like New Mexico and stuff, from the Hispanic influences and the veneration of the saints down there, and it gets into, you know, all this folklore kind of mixed up, and it's just fascinating stuff. And I thought, man, that would make a really cool role-playing game environment. I just got to get a rule set stuck with it.
Yeah, you could have a lot of like river travel.
Yeah.
Try not to die in the winter. You know,
Starve.
Yeah, that could be really interesting.
But some of, you know, the different tribes and stuff, and some of the like Comanche culture out of Oklahoma is real interesting, and how these guys would travel, you know, thousands of miles to or not thousands, but hundreds of miles to go on a raid for horses and stuff, and it's just amazing. But I would love to get something like that together, or even get, like I said, get a game together of some sort, develop some sort of game. I think everybody's always developing a game, aren't they?
Yeah. There's always something cooked up. One of them, what was one of them? I saw Blade Runner, is it 2049? I can't remember what the year was on the latest movie, but I walked out of there of like, oh, you could have a Blade Runner type non-trademark infringing setting, and like, here, you know, here's how you develop your plot hooks, or here's the type of mission, you know, you're sent to retire, or all that sort of stuff, or
a cyberpunk based.
Yeah, but real bare bones.
Now, have you ever played a lot of science fiction RPGs?
Not much. And I've got some rule sets here: Metamorphosis Alpha, the FASA Star Trek. If I were to pick one up, I think I'd probably want to play in the Star Trek world, because in my mind I spent so much time there growing up. But how about you?
Traveler.
Oh yeah.
Back in the day, back when it took us a whole session to roll up a character, and the character would die during character.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm gonna have to head out.
Okay, Scotty.
I will talk to you all soon.
Dude. Yeah.
All right, have a good one. Have a great night. Have fun.
Yeah, thank you. See you, Scotty.
Good to talk to you.
Bye-bye.
But yeah, Traveler was, and it had those little black books that they came in, and that was Actually, that was probably before Dungeons and Dragons that I discovered Traveller, and I had some older friends that played, and I played with them a lot, and it was pretty fun. And I kind of liked it. I don't know, it just had a very unique feel to it.
Yeah. At the Gen Con 50, I think they might have had a draft copy of the game or of Traveller or something too. They definitely had some like different copies of that as they were doing the history of gaming sort of display. It was kind of cool to see.
It makes me feel really old because it just seems like the other day that I was, sitting there drooling over wanting some of those, and and then I realized this is like old timers are talking about it. And now my kids, it's funny that now my kids they play a lot.
Yeah.
And they role play quite a bit. And funny thing is, I really have never successfully gamed with them very well because they always get frustrated with me.
You, Dad, I learned it from watching you.
Yeah. But like my son, he's like, well, he's got a girlfriend now, and he thinks he's a big stuff because of that. And he's like, well, I found her because of Dungeons and Dragons. So that's pretty funny. So it's just kind of funny how it's ingrained through the generations even. And
yeah.
And of course, I still kind of like the old style role playing. I'm still a big fan of kind of first, second edition era games, and they're so lethal, And I remember my poor daughter, she was probably 4 or 5 at the time, and we played, and she, she of course got killed by a cat or something, or a chipmunk or something, and just cried. I just remember seeing the big tears welling out of her eyes.
It is fun though, because kids, you don't need to explain very much of how it works. They just get it because it's play and it's imagination. And I think that is some of the longevity where video game styles will come and go. What's cool and what isn't with that at this point, and it's experiencing a big renaissance. I mean, not to get too philosophical, but it really does go back to a human need to tell stories and entertain each other, just face to face, that you can't do with a microprocessor. You can supplement it, but it's something we start doing as kids. So like for the neighborhood kids, as my kids have gotten older, they love it. Every time they're over, they ask if I can just run some sort of can we play D&D, which I just run a really simple, all right, something we can do within a few minutes, and when kids got to get home for dinner or whatever it is. And it's just so much fun. So yeah, it's been a hobby, and it is cool when you see your kids get the bug, or you hear them say, oh, I was running a game for the kids in the neighborhood. It's like, oh, I'm so proud.
Yeah. I don't play a huge amount anymore. We've kind of moved, and it's been kind of hard to find players and everything, but I kind of live vicariously right now through my son, and that's why a lot of the train and stuff I make, I just send to him. And
that's awesome.
Of course, I've found people that do play, and they've had old established groups, and I usually send like their DM some terrain, and that always gets me a lot of brownie points.
Yeah.
And I'm amazed at some of the simple terrain I make, and they think I'm just this genius artist, and I'm like, oh no, it's really nothing. It's just some cardboard.
Yeah, the first time I saw Scotty's videos and like just the suggested ones, I was like, oh no way, that looks way too hard. And then finally, after 10th time it shows up, I'm like, I'll take a look at this. It's like, I can't believe how simple this is.
I know. Well, I saw it. I thought this guy's making stuff with toilet paper and Elmer's glue. How good can it be?
Yeah.
And then it's like, wow, that's just this guy's a genius. When I met him and Susan that time, I asked Susan, I said, so what's it like to be married to a genius? And she said, well, I don't know, Scotty. they're really funny.
Yeah, I've done some Roll20 games with them before. And it always ends up, they must log in about the same time, where Susan's to one side of Scotty. So it's like, and they'll play they'll be set up their webcams in the same room. And Susan will look over at Scotty and give him the look. And it's just so funny when he's, goofing off or...
I hear you play a particularly interesting bard character.
I do. Lunar Lamp, who is just ridiculous pretty much.
Oh,
and for me, I mean, I've got to lead a fairly straight-laced life, which is great. It's fine as a clergy, but so to cut loose sometimes and make some morally questionable decisions as a bard can be a lot of fun. And a lot of it, it's so much fun to get the laugh too of how ridiculous you can make a scenario. The other thing that's fun with that character is probably like session 1 or 2. We came across these hyenas, and I don't know if I used like speak with animal or what, but ended up and Scotty's like role playing for this hyena, and I'm like, what is your name, you mangy mutt, blah blah blah, and he goes, Mange. so I've had this hyena Mange, and I've taken. I went to the Field Museum in Chicago. I took my picture next to the hyena and sent it to people, and it's one of those things that outside of the game, it's like it's just something stupid, but for us, it's like, oh, we've had all these adventures with Mange, and he's almost gotten killed, and all this different stuff. So
that's funny. Yeah, I think the most fun about D&D, looking back over the years, is I was, this was in the early 80s, sort of at the same time of the big Satanic Panic that was occurring. And I feel bad because I had most of my group were proud members of the very conservative Millington Street Bible Baptist Church. I always feel like I kind of led to their corruption in some way.
Oh my gosh.
I remember one of my friend's dads, I was at their house playing, and he picked up that first edition monster manual, and of course he just had to flip to all the pages that had the topless women in it.
Yeah, serious. Parents have like some sort of magnetic pull to that sort of stuff when you're middle school, high school, or like walk down, you're watching a movie, like just the most inappropriate spot, and that's how they always tend to walk in.
It's a 200-page book. How can you flip to those pages right off the bat?
That's funny. There's an old joke about the Baptist that was rescued from a deserted island. They were stranded, and the rescue crew gets there, and they say, well, do you want to show us around? I can't imagine you'll be back here, but so we can kind of document how you lived here. Oh, sure, okay. Well, this is my hut, and this is where I lived, and this is where most of the things happened. Well, what's this? And they say, well, what's this building next to? Oh, this is the chapel I built. This was a house of worship to God. Spent a lot of time here. And then they look over and they see this hut that's all decrepit and falling apart on the ground. And they say, well, what was that building? He goes, oh, well, that's the church I used to go to. It's funny. We went to this tiny little town in Texas, and there was the First Baptist Church, and then 500 feet away was the Second Baptist Church. You're just like, what went down?
Oh,
that it's like, you know what? Screw you. We're gonna make our own right next to you. Whatever.
I lived for quite a while in a Mennonite town, and Mennonites they used to split all the time.
Yeah.
They'd find some small matter of doctrine that they would have to get pretty upset about. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, people get fired up.
Yeah. But my friend, one of the things he gave me after a class reunion, he brought it to me just as more of a joke than anything, was the chip track.
Oh yeah, Dark Dungeons.
Dark Dungeon, yeah, and I still treasure it. You know, it's like, yes, and I looked for it because I was going to send people like you and all my friends a copy for Christmas
as a warning.
You have to have them. You have to do them by quantities of 1,000. And
yeah,
I just couldn't part. I think parting with $500-600 for
serious.
If I could get a dozen of them, that'd be pretty cool. And
yeah, I went to a house party with some gamers, and that was the party favor. It was copies of Dark Dungeons.
Awesome.
Somebody made a short film out of it.
Yeah.
And like they got the rights, which Jack Chick must be getting old and senile even more so now that he signed off the rights.
With us.
Oh, did he pass away at the time? This might have been okay. Okay, this might have been he was still alive, and his he signed the rights to it. So I don't know. But, yeah, that was some wild stuff in those.
It's a classic, man. It is just a classic. And so, yeah, Mike gave me a copy of that. And he says, here, he says, remember when we used to play Dungeons and Dragons? And I said, yeah. And he's still pretty conservative. And I said, yeah. And he said, I play that with my kids.
Well, it is very interesting. A lot of these old grognards I've played with, many of them are pretty involved and men of deep faith, which didn't get a lot of press in the 80s, which is kind of funny, so. But definitely sold copies of the game.
And I remember my dad, buying we were living in a fairly small town, and so going to the big city was kind of a treat about every 2 months. And so we'd go to Wichita, which was about an hour away, and that's where I would buy stuff. And I remember my dad looking at the stuff going, was this made in somebody's basement? And my grandma, I think I bought the First Giants module, the Hill Giant one. It's only like 4 pages, and it was like $5, and I saved up quite a bit. And my grandma was like, you paid $5 for that? Now I treasure. It's something I treasure now. In fact, I still use it quite a bit. And
how did it hold up? Okay.
It has, actually, surprisingly. All my books, first edition books, the quality in those was pretty good because I still flip through them probably once a week, and the pages still are held together, and compared to like a lot of the 5th edition stuff, which seems to be falling apart pretty fast.
Serious.
Yeah, I've lost a lot of pages, always falling out and stuff.
I think at the time too, I don't know if that was kind of unheard of. It seemed like to do like school bound hardcover books for something like that.
Well, and I think some of the early editions, the first original Dungeons and Dragons, those were made in Gygax's basement, pretty much, in his garage.
I've got to see a couple first printings, and I actually picked up there's like a copy with a horseman on the front. That's different than the white box because the artist had kind of swiped it from a pane of a Doctor Strange comic. And I recently, for maybe like $10, even with shipping, found that Doctor Strange and added that to my collection as, the 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon kind of thing of like, oh, well, this is the Doctor Strange that this version, has this swipe out of. But at the time, again, it was not started with this thought of, oh, this is going to be a multi-million-dollar thing. Like, to sell a few thousand copies of your game at that time was a big deal. Not versus millions of people playing and buying your stuff was pretty unheard of.
And didn't Avalon Hill didn't they reject a lot of these? That's great.
There's a manuscript that somebody has, I think John Peterson, is the Avalon Hill version of it that they pitched to it and was rejected. But again, like, it's one of those things. And to think if there's nothing like it at the time, how would you explain it? You can't. I mean, you kind of have to have the thing of like, here's how it might sound. Okay, Johnny, you walk down the blah blah blah, which kind of became a standard thing. But it's crazy to think of what could have been with some of this. Wesley was talking to me once, saying how, if you think about how crazy this was, here's Gygax with a bunch of unsold copies of Chainmail in his basement, making 1,000 boxes of a $10 in 1974, $10 a copy game. And like, I mean, this was a huge risk.
Yeah. Well, and I think these guys really struggled with, you know, maintaining the intellectual property.
Yeah.
I think that was probably the big, I mean, how do you, you know, copyright this stuff? Or how do you keep people from, you know, making copies and everything? And I think it made the guys, the guys got kind of a little, they're in the early 80s. Most of the developers seemed a little touchy, and I think I can understand why. And what I think is interesting is one of the few companies left from that time period is Flying Buffalo, which
theirs was a Grim Tooth Traps.
Yeah. And I think I had Castle Buffalo was the one that my some relative got me, and of course I was, you know, at this time I was a Dungeons and Dragons snob, so you know, of course I looked down upon it. Now I kind of like look at it like, this is actually kind of cool.
Yeah.
Oh, it's Judges Guild, you know. I felt like that, and then nowadays it's like, man, this stuff's pretty creative.
Well, you want to talk about made in somebody's basement? Some of those Judges Guild ones are like, you breathe on them wrong and they fall apart.
They look like mimeographed copies of a mimeographed copy.
So I saw the preview footage of this D&D documentary called Secrets of Blackmore that's being produced right now. And there's a scene that somebody from Judges Guild, he goes, this is a copy of Dave Arneson's first fantasy campaign produced by Judges Guild this year, blah, blah, blah. As far as I know, this is the only copy in existence, first printing, still in the shrink wrap. Then he pulls out an X-Acto knife and opens it. And at the screening, you just, like, you hear all these people just gasp, no!
Did Arneson keep playing up until he died?
Yep. In fact, up until I think even in the week or two leading up to it, he had been getting in poorer and poorer health. A really cool story though, friend Mitchka, who you might know him from some of the boards and stuff, but he refs at a convention in Rockford, Illinois called RockCon. And he told me this story of probably around 2009, this game called B Movie. And the game's going along and they hit this point where the refs are like, there's no way you guys can win this. We should probably call it a game. And they go, oh, well, come on. The players are like, let's keep going. There's got to be a way we can figure this out. Sure enough, this guy figures out how to win Kobayashi Maru, the unwinnable scenario that they find themselves in. He says, hey, wow, that was a ton of fun. Thanks. And this guy leaves the table, and his co-ref says, oh, wow, that guy was pretty good. And Mitchka goes, you know who that was, right? No, that was Dave Arneson. And Wesley had some stories, too, of in role-playing scenarios, Arneson just figuring out these very creative ways to win these unwinnable scenarios. And yeah, I mean, he was a gamer through and through all the way to the end, which is which is cool. And you know, I guess I've never really thought of it as a sport, but you know what? If esports can be a sport and you're just sitting at a computer,
Yeah.
I think role playing really is. Honestly, I've never really thought of it or said it in this way. I've compared it to, and I've said to my wife of like, hey, at least it's not sports. And now it's hit the point where she goes, I wish it was. It would be less consuming. But I digress. I mean, it really is a sport.
Fantasy football.
And you know, there's sportsmanship to it also. How you interact at the table. Are you going to be a jerk about you know, oh well, technically this is a blah blah blah, or do you look at the spirit of the game and be like, you know what, it's all good. You know, like and I've seen great sportsmanship and poor sportsmanship at the table, and with war games also. But I find a lot of that is contingent on how the ref is going to run stuff, and they set the tone. The DM does, and they can have a lot of influence. And it is such a great life building skill of like how to run a team or how to do all sorts of things.
Yeah, I think as a team building exercise, I mean, over the years, you know, I've had to sit through a lot of corporate team building exercises, and sometimes I wish we could just play D&D instead.
Yeah. I'm just trimming up some of these bandit guys.
Cutting holes. It's just constant kind of cutting holes in foam. It's nothing. It's good probably that I don't have a camera because it ain't pretty to look at.
You could start a sub channel with that of, you know, cutting foam hole cutting and just.
Yeah, they're not really circles. They're kind of just I don't know what they are. They're maybe as ice terrain. This would actually look pretty cool. But
well, I need 4 of these guys at least for my session, and I've got 4 of them painted. One of them a sword broke off, so I had to just super glue it back on. Big globs that I'll just kind of paint over. But as Scotty was saying, with table ready, like no one notices. And again, it's a 5-cent mini.
One thing I've got lately, just for painting quick, again, for sending them off to my son, is those, oh gosh, what are they called? Those Magic the Gathering cheapo.
Planewalker, or Arena of the Planeswalkers.
Yeah, and I've just been painting those black with the base coat and then hitting them with a dry brush of white.
Yeah.
And I mean, they're really not real good miniatures, some of them, and so they look pretty good that way, though. And they just, you know, for just quick play. Probably the latest craft project I'm really proud of is, did you see Vanessa's Tiamat?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've made 3 of those, painted 3 of those up so far.
Oh, really? The Walmart ones?
Yeah, and they look. I'm looking at one right now, and they look great.
Yeah.
I painted one up to give the kids for Christmas. Hopefully, they won't be logging on to this channel.
Spoiler alert, Dad.
Yeah, if you kids are listening to this right now, you should be doing your homework.
Yeah, you're gonna get them charcoal instead then. Yeah, I bought a while back with a Michael's coupon a Hydra that had 5 heads, and my thought was, well, you could paint this. This is probably a couple of years ago. I've had it. It's on my many long list of going to get to it someday. But my thought was like, you could paint this up and have it look a lot like Tiamat if you just do the colors right. And then I started thinking, well, yeah, but it doesn't have wings on it, so how would it fly? And then it's like, you realize you're talking about elf games, right? It's like, well, who cares, I guess. If you need to justify, like, this magical demigod wouldn't be able to fly without wings, it's like, just repeat that, but slower.
It's not realistic magic, Nathan. It's realistic magic. Yeah, I remember back in the early days when there was great arguments over that sort of stuff. And it was pretty funny, some of them I heard. Or the pronunciation of D-R-O-W. I've saw some tremendous arguments over that.
I've always heard it drow.
I say drow, but In fact, I've had arguments with my daughter over that, who says "dro," and I said, "No, that's silliness." And so then I'm like brown cow, and she's like crow. Things never change.
Are you gonna milk a cow? Well, English is a pretty terrible language in terms of clear-cut rules.
Yeah.
I took a whole quarter, not even a semester, but a whole quarter of Japanese in college.
Oh.
A lot of it was him just ripping into English about how it doesn't make a whole lot of sense if you're learning it.
Oh,
but it's kind of a hodgepodge, so it's hard to, I don't know.
Yeah, but English doesn't have particles. The particle "ka" to make a question.
Yeah.
Yeah, I took about. I kind of felt defeated. I took Japanese lessons, for about 7 or 8 years, and by the end of that time, I realized that I understood Spanish, which I'd never taken, a lot better than I understood Japanese.
It's
hard.
Yeah.
It's terribly hard. I was just doing it as a hobby, but it was like maybe if I had a little more at stake, it would have been better. But well, I think I've got about 50 tree stumps here. They look like now out of foam. So
I'm gonna try and get one more of these guys.
Yeah,
his body painted here. There's clothes.
And then I think I might have to hit the hay. This life of leisure is killing me.
It's a full-time job, all this leisure.
It's a full-time job. Yeah, I actually have to go out and find some sort of gainful employment one of these days. Not sure what, but
it's a trap.
I know.
Well, Kemper, it was great catching up with you, and we'll have to do it again. I'm not sure when the next one will be, but I'll make sure you get the invite.
I would love that. Yeah,
so
I've been really enjoying
catching up.
And if you'd like, maybe someday we can play, maybe get a Roll20 game together or something, do a one-shot.
That would be very fun.
Yeah, okay. Well, have a good evening. And
yeah, you too.
And I'll talk to you probably later sometime.
Yep.
Okay, take it easy.
Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks to everybody watching. Have a good night and see you next time.